What is the number one cause of bugs, crashes, and bad data in your application? It's almost always user input. An empty name, an invalid email, a number that's way out of range. But what if you could stop that bad data before it ever mess up your system? That's where the power of validation comes in. In this video tutorial, we are going to make it using Spring Boot. We'll cover everything from simple checks like not null and min max to validate complex formats like emails and our own pattern using regular expressions. If you are ready to build more robust and secure applications, you are in the right place. Let's get started. Let's begin by creating a new Spring Boot project. The easiest way to do this is with the Spring Initializer. Just open your web browser and go to start.spring.io. On this page, we'll set up our project. Choose Maven for project type and Java as the language. For the Spring Boot version, the best to use the latest stable version. Avoid any version labeled snapshot or M for milestone. At the time I'm recording this, the latest stable version is 3.5.5. I'll select that one. Next, we need to fill the project details. For the group name, I will use com.learnwithiftekhar. Let's name our project Validation Demo. Make sure the packaging is set to jar and I'll choose Java 21 since that's what I have installed. Now we need to add a couple of dependencies. Click this Add Dependencies button. The first dependency I am going to add is Spring Web. This lets us build web APIs. Then add another dependency, search for validation. This gives us the tool for validate data. That's all we need for now. We are not doing any database work in this tutorial. This tutorial is about how to validate user input. And if we need more dependencies later, we can always add them. Now click this generate button. Our project is generated and downloaded as a zip file. Go ahead and open it in your favorite code editor. Here I have opened it in my IDE. I am using IntelliJ IDEA. On the left side, you can see all the files and folders. Let's open this pom.xml file. This file lists all the project settings and dependencies we just choose. Here are the dependencies we added. This one, Spring Boot Starter Validation. This one is for validation. And this one, Spring Boot Starter Web for web features. Now, let's write some code. We'll start by creating a simple Java class to represent a student. Go to src, then main, then Java. Inside this main package, let's create a new Java class. I will call it student. A student will have a few properties like an student ID, a first name and a last name. Let's define them. For the student ID, I will write private string student ID. Next, the first name, private string first name. And for the last name, it is private, then string and last name. For the properties to be usable, we need to generate getter and setter. To generate this, I will use the shortcut Command+N on my Mac. You can check whatever the shortcut in your operating system. You can also right click and then choose generate. Select getter and setter. Choose all the fields and click OK. Our getters and setters are now generated. Now we need to generate toString method. Then choose toString. Select all the fields and click OK. This toString method is helpful for printing the object details. Next, we need a way to receive student data from web request. For this, we'll create a student controller. A controller handles incoming web request. Inside this base package, I will create a new Java class called student controller. Give it the REST controller annotation. This tells Spring that this class will handle API request. Inside the controller, I will create a method that listens for post request. Add post mapping at the top It's a public method that returns response entity of type student. Let's name this method process student data. We'll send data in the request as a JSON object. To accept a JSON object that contains student data, we need the request body annotation. The parameter will be student object. Let's call it student. The request body annotation tells Spring to take the incoming JSON and convert it into our student object. For now, the method just send the same student object back as confirmation. So we return response entity dot OK and pass student as argument. Now let's test this to make sure everything works. Start the project. I'll use the shortcut Ctrl+R. The project starts on port 8080. Let's open Postman to test our API. Create a new request and set it to post. The URL is localhost:8080. In the body section, choose raw and select JSON. Now let me send this request. Here I'm getting method not allowed. Okay, this needs to be post request. Now send a request again. Now I'm getting the bad request. Okay, that is because I'm not sending any data. Let me add some student data. A JSON object. Here I will add a student ID and send a request again. Great. Now it's working. I am getting the student data back in the response. Here it seems I forgot to add another field in the student class. I forgot to include middle name. Back to the student class. Here for the middle name, I will add a private field. It's string and middle name. Now we need to generate the getter and setter for this middle name. Generate, then getter and setter. Select middle name and click OK. I also need to update the toString method. Let's remove the old one and generate a new toString method with all of the fields. Let's start the project. Now, if I send a request again, you can see all the fields including this middle name. Now comes to the interesting part, adding validation. Let's say all these fields are required except this middle name. The middle name can be empty, but the other field must have values. How do we do this? It's actually quite simple. Back to the student class. Let's start with the student ID. I will add the not null annotation above it. This validation rule checks if the field exists in the request. If it's missing, Spring will throw an error. Let's test this. In Postman, I will send a request with the first name, but no student ID. I forgot to restart the project. Let me restart it first. Ctrl+R. Now back to Postman. Send the request again. Still accepting request. Let's check the controller. Okay, that's because I need to tell Spring to actually validate the request. In this student controller, here we need to add this valid annotation before the request body. It tells Spring to validate the student object before processing it. Let me restart the project again and send a request using Postman. This time I'm getting a 400 bad request status. Let's check what is in the console. Here we have this validation error. Here it shows method argument not validation exception. Validation failed for the argument. Here it is field error. Here it says must not be null. Okay, so our request did not contain the student ID, so validation failed and it shows the exception with this message. But checking error in the console is not very helpful. Instead, I want to return a clear error message in the API response. For that, I will create a custom exception handler. When validation fails, Spring throws a method argument not valid exception. I'll create a class to catch this exception and return a nice error message. In the main package, let's create a new Java class. Let's call it custom validation exception. At the top of the class, add REST controller advice annotation. This tells Spring that this class will handle exception. Inside the class, I'll create a method to handle validation exceptions. This is public method. The method returns response entity of map. We'll put string, ASCII and value, and let's call it handle validation exception. It takes the exception as parameter, that is method argument not valid exception. Here we need to add an annotation for this method, exception handler. Here we need to provide the name for which this method will invoke, that is method argument not valid exception dot class. Inside this method, first I will create an empty hash map to store the errors. So map errors, and this equals new hash map. Make sure these are imported from Java util package. Here, then I will loop through all the validation errors. Here, from the exception, get the binding result, then get all errors. I will loop through all the validation errors here. So for each error, a lambda expression. Here, what we'll do is that first extract the field name where the error has occurred, then get the error associated with that field, and from these we'll build the response in this format. We'll have JSON object, then field name will be our property, and put the error message as the value. We'll do this by adding them to our errors map. We'll get the field name and the error message and add them to the errors map. Finally, I'll return the errors with 400 status code. Okay, first let's extract the field. Declare a new field error object, name field error. This equals our error, ERR. Here we need to cast it with field error. Now get the associated field name, string field name, and we can get the field name using field error dot get field. For getting error associated with that field, declare new variable string error message. This equals error dot get default message. Now put them in our errors map. Errors dot put key is our field name and provide the error message as value. And now we'll return the response. Let's move this comment outside the loop. Here we'll return the response. Return new response entity. In the constructor, provide error as constructor argument. We also mention the HTTP status code. It is HTTP status dot bad request. Let me restart the project and test this. Back to the Postman and send this request again. Here we're getting this nice JSON response with the error. It says student ID must not be null. That's much better. Now we can even customize the error message. Back to the student class. Here in this not null annotation, I will add a message. Here it will be student ID is required. Restart the project and test it again. Perfect. Now it shows my custom message. Student ID is required. Let me add the student ID back and send a valid request. Great. This request is accepted. Now let me try something interesting. What if we send an empty string for the student ID? Let's do this. I'll just put an empty quotes, send the request, and it's accepted. Spring thinks this is valid, but it should not be. An empty string is not a valid student ID. But why? Why this happening? This happens because not null only check if the field is not null. An empty string is not null, so it passes the validation. Here is a small and easy fix. Here we can add a size annotation, give it a message. student ID should have at least one character. Here we need to add min to 1. With this, we are enforcing that student ID field needs to have at least one character. Let me restart the server and test this using the postman. Now, if I send a request without this student ID, I will get this error message with student ID is required. And if I send an empty string, I get student ID should have at least one character. So here, back to the student class. Here we can refactor this. Instead of this both not null and size, we can use another separate validation annotation, that is not empty. This single annotation does both checks. Let me replace them with not empty with the message student ID is required. Restart. Send a request using postman. Back to the postman. This time let's remove the student ID property and send the request. Here we are getting this error, student ID is required. Let's bring back our student ID with proper ID, and if we send this request, the request will be accepted because our student now have a valid ID. Let's remove this with a blank string, and if we send the request with this blank string, we get this error, student ID is required. Now it works the same way but with just one annotation. And now what if we send request with a space in the student ID? Let's try that. And it accepted. Not empty annotation allows spaces because technically spaces are also characters, but we don't want that. So how we can fix that? How we can enforce that it should contain valid characters, not only spaces? Well, we have another validation annotation, that is not blank. Not blank checks for null empty strings and strings with only spaces. Now restart and test it. Send the request. Now if I send spaces, it's rejected. Perfect. Let me add same validation to other fields. For the first name, this is not blank with message first name is required. For the middle name, paste the annotation, update a message to middle name is required. And for the last name, same thing, paste the annotation and update the message to last name. And let me restart and test with invalid data. Sending this request with invalid data. Here I am getting errors for all the missing fields. Now let me send with valid data. Add a student ID and giving it some ID. Then the first name John. Then we have to provide a middle name. This John doesn't have any middle name. Then we have their last name Doe. Here if we send a request, we'll get this error, middle name is required. Okay, let's add a middle name J dot. Send this request. Here we are getting the customer object back, so the validation was successful. But here we are facing another issue. Not everyone has a middle name. Like this John Doe. John Doe does not have a middle name. So middle name with blank or spaces should be allowed. But the not blank does not allow empty strings. For that middle name, I want to allow empty strings, but I will not allow any null values. Let me make you clear why we do not allow the null for this middle name. Because if we try to do operations on a null string like converting it to uppercase, it will crash. So empty strings are safe to work with, but null values are dangerous. So for the middle name, I will use not null instead of not blank. So adding the annotation not null. This allows empty strings but prevent null values. Let me restart and test it again. Now the request is accepted even with empty middle name. And if we provide some middle name, and it is also a valid request. If I completely remove this middle name field, I will get the error middle name cannot be null. Perfect. This is exactly what we want. So now you know the difference between these validation annotations, that is not null, prevents null values only. Then we have these not empty, prevents null and empty strings. And we have another not blank. This prevents null, empty strings and strings with only spaces. We need to choose the right one based on our needs. Next, let's set up an interesting validation rule. This one is for student ID. We need to follow a specific format. It has to start with a capital S, then it must have exactly 5 numbers after it. So, how can we do that? It's pretty simple with Spring Boot. We can use a regular expression to check if the ID matches our pattern. Alright, let's switch over to our student class and get this done. First, let's quickly remove these unused imports. It's always good for us to keep the code clean as we go. Okay, so the main task here is to make sure this student ID has a specific pattern. I want it to have capital S followed by 5 digits, something like this. So, how should we approach this? A regular expression is a perfect tool for the job. It's designed for exactly this kind of pattern matching. Let's go with that. Okay, we'll need another validation annotation for this, the pattern annotation. It has a property called regexp. Here, we can provide our regular expression. Now, for the tricky part, the regular expression pattern itself. Honestly, I am very bad at generating this regular expression, so I will take help from ChatGPT. It's super fast for generating these kind of things. Alright, let's ask here. Give me a regular expression to match the format and where it will have a capital S followed by 5 digits. Perfect. It gave us one right away. Let's copy that and head back to our student class. We will paste it into the regex property. Let's add a clear error message for the user. I will replace this comment with the new message text. Let's copy this comment and paste it in the message. Alright, let's run the project. Switch over to Postman to see if our new rule works. First, test with the failure case. Update the student ID with an invalid hello. 400 bad request. Perfect. Look the response. It's showing our exact error message. Student ID must be in the format as followed by 5 digits. That's great because it means our validation is catching the bad data just like we wanted. Okay, now let's try valid one. I will fix the ID to follow our pattern with a capital S and 5 digits. Let's send it and success. The request is accepted. Okay, our validation is working perfectly. Alright, let's move to some other validation process. Let's head back to our student class. We are going to record the student as now. To do that, let's add a new field, private integer as. Now for this as field, we need to create the getter and setter and 2 string methods. But honestly, generating those methods every single time is pretty annoying. So let's use a great library called Lombok to reduce all the boilerplate code for us. First, we need to include the Lombok dependency in our Spring Boot project. Let's search for Maven repository. Here, we are looking for this URL from central.sonatype.com. Let's go to the Maven Central and search for Lombok. Here, we are looking for this specific one from org.projectlombok. Let's click on this link. Here, we need to make sure Apache Maven is selected from this drop-down. Now, we need to copy this code snippet and we can just copy it by clicking the copy to clipboard button. Okay, we have got our code snippet copied. Let's go back to the ID and open the pom.xml file. We just need to paste that new dependency right inside the dependency section. Now, to update our Maven repository, click this icon right here to synchronize the Maven changes. And it looks like it's synchronized. Perfect. Let's close this file. And the other tabs to clean up our workspace. Alright, back in our student class. Now, we don't need these old getter and setter methods anymore. Let's just delete them. We can remove these toString methods too. And we no longer need those methods. At the top of the class, instead of the getter and setters, we can now use the getter annotation. This one comes from Lombok.getter. For the setter, we use the setter annotation. And for toString, here we'll use toString annotation. That's it. From now on, we can add any fields we want and we won't have to write those methods ourselves because Lombok will handle all of it for us. Okay, we added this age field and now we need to add some validation to it. First of all, we need to make sure this is not null. So let's add not null. While a blank space might be okay in some places, but age must have a value. If it's null, we'll show a message, age is required. Next, we also need to add another rule for our student. The student must be at least 17 years old. We can enforce this using the mean annotation and give it a value 17. And for the message, here let's write student must be at least 17 years old. Okay, but we are not done with the age field yet. We have a minimum, but we should also have a maximum limit. Let's use max annotation for this. We will set the value to 100. So the message will be something like student age must not be greater than 100 years. Alright, let's test all our age rules in Postman. Here, if you're using IntelliJ IDEA like me, you may need to make sure this annotation processing is enabled. So click here to enable it. First, if we send a request without age field, we get our age is required message. Perfect. Now let's try an age of 16. Send it and the response is student must be at least 17 years old. Also perfect. But what if we try with 101? It's probably not possible, but let's see. Send it and it's not accept. Great. So only accepted value is between 17 and 100. Okay, let's try with 25. Send a request and it's accepted. This is a valid request. Awesome. Let's have some fun with dates now. After age, let's add another student's birth date. It will be private field using local date. Make sure this local date is imported from java.time package and we'll call it date of birth. This field should also be not null and our message will be date of birth is required. Now for the date of birth, it has to be date in the past. That just makes sense, right? A student has to be born already. Okay, we can make sure of these by using the past annotation. If there is an error, our message will be date of birth must be in the past. Let's try one more thing with the dates. We want to record the expected graduation date. So there's another field, private, local date, and it's for expected graduation date. It's also not null with the message expected graduation date is required. And this date should obviously be in the future. The student is just getting admitted now. To enforce this, we'll use the future annotation with the message graduation date must be in the future. Okay, let's test those two date fields. We'll restart the server in the Postman. We have our age and now let's provide a date of birth, say May 15th, 2000. So first we need to provide the year followed by a dash, then month, that is 05, followed by dash, and it's the date, that is 15. And for the expected graduation date, let's try giving the past date, the same as the date of birth. I will paste that in here and send a request. And we get an error. Expected graduation date is required. Looks like I made a typo in the expected graduation date field in the student class. Let's fix this. Okay, here it is. Now, let's start the server again. Send a request now. And we are getting the correct error. Graduation date must be in the future. It's currently 2025. So let's say the graduation date is 2050. Now send this request and it's accepted. Now what if we put the date of birth in the future, like 2035? Let's try that, and we get the date of birth must be in the past. Perfect. Let's change it back to valid request. Now let's see how to validate an email. And believe me, this one is easy. In our student class, we'll declare a new field, private string, name it email. To validate it, we just use the built-in email annotation. That's it. With a message, email address is required. Of course, we also want it to be not null. With a message, email address is required. For the email message, let's update it to something better, like please provide a valid email address. Also, we want to record the courses the student is enrolled in. A student can enroll in multiple courses, so we can use a list. It will be a private list. Make sure this is imported from Java UTL package, and it will be list of string. We'll name it enrolled course. Now, how to make sure the list has at least one course? Every student has to be enrolled in something. The list just could not be empty. And for this, we can use not empty annotation. This is the perfect use case for it. The not empty annotation will make sure our enrolled course is not empty. Let's give it a message. Student must enroll in at least one course. Okay, let's do one final validation for this tutorial. We want to record the student's GPA. This will also be a private field with the type big decimal. Make sure it's imported from java.math package. The field name is GPA. First of all, it has to be not null with a message GPA is required. Next, the GPA cannot be negative. We can enforce this with the decimal mean annotation. We'll provide a value 0.0. This annotation has an inclusive flag. I want to make sure a GPA of 0.0 is allowed. So we'll set inclusive to true. Let's give it an error message. GPA must be at least 0.0. Now let's say the maximum GPA at our institution is 4.0. To enforce that, we'll use another annotation, decimal max, with a value of 4.0. This one is also inclusive. And let's add a message, GPA must not exceed 4.0. I will add one more validation, the number of digits allowed in the GPA. For that, we use digits annotation. What can a GPA look like? It could be 4.00 or maybe 3.50. So we can have one digit for the integer part and two digits for the fraction part. Let's enforce this. In the digits, we will provide the property integers as 1 and fraction as 2. And the message will be GPA must have at most one integer and two fraction digits. Here I have a typo here. It will be integer. Alright, let's restart this one more time and check the final result. Back in the Postman, let's add the other field. I am giving an email, that is learnwithiftekhar@gmail.com. Then enrolled courses. What was the spelling of that field? Okay, enrolled courses. Actually, it should be plural. Let's quickly update our student class and restart the server. Let's copy this. Okay, back to the Postman. For enrolled courses, let's say our student enrolled in math physics, and chemistry. And finally, let's give the student a GPA of 3.85. If we send a request, it's a valid request. We have provided all the valid information here. Now, let's try with some invalid request. Here, it's a bit hard to see the request and response this way. Let's change the layout. I'll go to the 2-pane view. Much better. Now, we can see our request on the left and response on the right. Let's provide some invalid data and see if it's working properly. For the GPA, let's add an extra digit to the fraction and send the request. Okay, here is our error. GPA must have at most one integer and 2 fraction digits. And let's try with a negative value. And here we have the response. GPA must be at least 0.0. So it's working. Let's back to the correct value. For the enrolled courses, let's try with an empty array. If we send this request, we get the error. Student must enroll in at least one course. Similarly, if we give it an invalid email address, we get a proper error that we need to provide a valid email. Awesome work! We have covered a ton of built-in validation rules today. In the next video, we'll take it to the next level and create our very own custom validation rule from scratch. You won't want to miss it. See you there.